Give a few seconds, everybody, a chance to grab their chair. All right, good morning, everybody. Meeting will come to order. I note that a quorum is present, and each member has before them copies of the material on our agenda today as their place, at their place on the rostrum. Today, the committee will consider 5 bills, all of which have been identified in consultation with the ranking member that address a wide range of issues within the committee's jurisdiction, streaming the delivery of disaster assistance, improving forest management opportunities through partnerships with tribes and local governments, expanding opportunities in agricultural research and innovation through precision agriculture, and even recognizing the APHIS Beagle Brigade. Now, while we're certainly covering a breadth of issues, there's commonality among each of the bills before us today. They are all bipartisan, and I'm happy to support each of them. I'll be offering substitute amendments for 2 of the bills in order to address changes that have been adopted in other markups or to make adjustments to comply with floor protocols. And we'll give more detail when those bills are brought up for consideration. I now recognize the distinguished ranking member, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, for any opening remarks that he may have.
And thank you, our distinguished chairman. I really appreciate, Chairman, you bringing these important bills before the committee, and I want to recognize and say how much I appreciate the talent and the work on both sides of the aisle, and that they have really put their energies into these great bills, and our committee staff are doing a wonderful job with assisting our members on these bills. From helping our producers, conserving our forests and farms, protecting American agriculture from pests and disease to research, the Agriculture Committee touches every American. These bills are being considered today because our diverse and very talented Agriculture Committee members have great ideas. And I want to again thank them. I want to thank their staffs who are working so hard for their individual constituents. And I applaud them for rolling up their sleeves to get the job done, do good work on solving problems that affect our agriculture industry, and improving the programs that our constituents rely on. Mr. Chairman, I want to also thank you and your staff as well, and my own staff for their work on these bills. They're all bipartisan, and what a great meeting we're going to have today. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Well, I thank the gentleman. The first bill for consideration is H.R. 662, the Block Grant Assistance Act of 2023. The bill, H.R. 662, the Block Grant Assistance Act of 2023, is now before the committee for consideration. Without objection, a first reading of the bill will be waived and will be open for amendment at any point. Without objection, the Subcommittee on General Farm Commodities, Risk Management, and Credit is discharged from further consideration of H.R. 662. Do any members have remarks on the bill? Gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Well, thank you, Chairman Thompson and my colleagues, for considering H.R. 662, the Block Grant Assistance Act of 2023, in today's markup. This bill, led by my colleagues, Representatives Scott Franklin and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, has the support of the entire Florida delegation and is urgently needed by citrus producers in our state. After all, what is Florida if not citrus, right? Hurricane Ian impacted more than 375,000 acres of citrus groves, costing nearly $675 million in damages to the industry. In December of last year, Congress appropriated $3.7 billion to address agricultural losses from hurricanes and other natural disasters. However, to date, no citrus grower has received any of the agricultural disaster relief funds. Let me repeat that. No citrus grower has received any of the relief funds. This bill would allow the Secretary of Agriculture to create a program within USDA to support specialty crops, including citrus, damaged by natural disasters. In 2017, this relief model was successfully used to help growers recover from Hurricane Irma. The Block Grant Assistance Act would provide the same flexibility to the Secretary to help Florida citrus growers recover now from Hurricane Ian. Citrus is a crucial part of Florida's economy, with industry having more than 400,000 acres of citrus groves across the state. The industry contributes $6.8 billion to the economy every year and supports almost 35,000 jobs. Citrus growers have had no shortage of challenges over the past 2 decades, from citrus greening to natural disasters and labor concerns, but our state's producers have remained resilient. This bill would help our growers recover from Hurricane Ian by allowing the Secretary to efficiently deploy the funds that have already been appropriated by Congress. I want to thank again Chairman Thompson for considering this bill today, and I encourage all of my colleagues to support this measure. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Do any other members seek recognition for discussion on this bill? The gentleman from Florida is recognized. Mr. Soto, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, natural disasters are inevitable, especially in places like Florida. And so the question becomes, how do we best help our farmers and growers recover? We saw Hurricane Ian hit our district, much like we saw Hurricane Irma before that. And many of the existing programs just don't quite fit or work. And so we had Secretary Vilsack come down to Central Florida, and he made a promise to simplify the relief process through block grants. This bill would do just that, allow USDA to provide needed relief to agriculture producers devastated by natural disasters in 2022 via previously successful block grant strategy, as my dear colleague Kat Kamek mentioned in Hurricane Irma. More than 90% of Florida citrus production was impacted by tropical storms in 2022, totaling 375,302 acres. And the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services expects these devastating losses to cost between $416 million to $675 million. And citrus is a big industry, obviously, for our state. Also is the main vitamin C source for the nation through orange juice, and generates $6.8 billion annually per year. The language in the December omnibus unfortunately didn't provide Secretary Vilsack direct authority to disperse the appropriated disaster funds via a block grant. So today we correct that mistake, we streamline the process, and we make sure to get well-needed relief to our citrus growers and others in Florida. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hosting this, and for Ranking Member Scott, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Any other members seek recognition for discussion on the bill? Gentleman from California, Mr. Costa, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was looking at the bills today, and I think they serve a number of good purposes. I guess I'd like a greater clarification as we're looking at disaster relief that's been provided in the past in commodities and agricultural areas that have been so impacted, on the notion, and I don't know who may opine on this, on the block grant provisions and how that may in fact work. I just heard as we talked in about the importance for America's citrus industry, and I certainly understand that and support that. But it's just not clear to me how, under the way we have provided traditional funding for such impacted areas on an individual grower basis, how this will now translate on a block grant, and how well it's been thought out in terms of the distributions of those funds versus the funding, the means of the funding that we provided during the previous budget year. And I don't know if anyone can explain that to me, who wrote the bill and how they want to see the precedent of this take place. But clearly we have, three states in particular, Florida, Texas, and California, that produce just about all of the citrus in the country. And they've all got different challenges that they are facing. And so I just want to know how this has been thought out, and is it a work in progress, and is it something that we can therefore have further input on as it progresses?
Gentleman, yield?
Yes.
The way this language was set up, it basically replicates what has already been done in the past with using block grants in Florida. It gives authority to the secretary to be able to work with the states and specifically looking at different specialty crops, to be able to basically make these awards where it's deemed necessary. So there is a precedent. The particular piece of legislation was built on a precedent that's been used in the past for specialty crops, but specifically just in Florida. We obviously need to broaden that.
And would the gentleman yield or reclaiming my time? Has there been conversations with the USDA and the secretary on how this might go forward?
I'll yield to the gentlelady, the sponsor of this bill, Mrs. Camming.
Well, and thank you to the chairman. Thank you, Representative Costa. This actually stems from conversations with Secretary Vilsack to give him the flexibility and means by which to distribute disaster relief funds to our specialty crops in Florida. There was direct conversations with the USDA as well as testimony within the committee on this. And I'm not sure if you were in the room when I was talking about this, but up until this point, of the $3.7 billion that's been allocated for disaster relief, none has been received by citrus growers in Florida. And it's because of this technical issue that the USDA cannot overcome without direct action from our committee. So this is actually us working hand in glove with USDA to rectify that, to give the necessary flexibility to the secretary to do this.
Well, I thank the gentlewoman from Florida for that explanation, and would just request that we continue to work together on this. As you know, we have a lot of citrus in California, and I want to make sure that this is even-handed and well thought out, and I'll make my own efforts to reach out to the Secretary and to the United States Department of Agriculture to see how they view this as being worked on, assuming we pass it and it's signed into law. Okay? Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the time, and I look forward to working with all of you on these important efforts. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman, and thank for your leadership with those over 600 specialty crops in California that are produced. Incredibly important.
Thank you.
Anyone else seek to speak on the bill? Seeing none, does any member have any amendment to the bill? All right, seeing none, I now recognize the ranking member for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the bill H.R. 662, as amended, be reported favorably to the House with the recommendation that it do pass.
Does any member wish to speak on that motion? All right, seeing none. I'm sorry, what's that? The questions on the motion offered by the gentleman from Georgia to favorably report H.R. 662. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and Bill H.R. 662 is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Does any member give notice of intent to file supplemental, minority, additional, or dissenting views to H.R. 662? If so, please have them submitted to the Council's office, room 1407 by 5 p.m. on Monday, May 15th. Very good. We'll move on to the next bill, H.R. 1450, Treating Tribes and Counties as Good Neighbors Act. The bill, H.R. 1450, the Treating Tribes and Counties as Good Neighbors Act, is now before the committee for consideration, and without objection, a first reading of the bill will be waived, and it will be open for amendment at any point. Without objection, the Subcommittee on Forestry is discharged from further consideration of H.R. 1450. Do any members have remarks on the bill?
Mr. Chairman?
The gentlelady from Washington State is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for including this bill in today's markup. So when I shared this news of this markup with my state forester, he responded in an email, "Great news," with 6 exclamation points. Why? This really is great news. This bill gives back the flexibilities under good neighbor authority to tribes and counties who understand that wildfires do not discriminate if they're on federal or non-federal land. And it allows us to use all of the tools at our disposal to mitigate the effects of wildfire and maintain healthy forests. In the 2018 Farm Bill, Congress expanded good neighbor authority to make tribes and counties eligible to enter into these agreements. However, tribes and counties were not afforded the same authority as states to retain G&A project revenues to reinvest in conservation. This greatly reduced the ability to engage and partner on critical management projects, including wildfire mitigation, invasive species removal, and habitat maintenance. Additionally, the 2018 Farm Bill removed the ability to carry out restoration services that were agreed to under the Good Neighbor Authority on non-federal lands. As a result, adjacent tribal and county land that is essential to the health and productivity of national forests can no longer be treated as a comprehensive landscape. Skamania County, my home county, was the first in the state to build a relationship with the State Department of Natural Resources to determine how this Good Neighbor Authority could help improve the forest health conditions in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, which make up 80% of Skamania County. This partnership, along with the Forest Service, the state agencies, and Skamania County has been hugely successful. The county just hired a forester who gives the county extra capacity and expertise to manage larger and more complex G&A projects. The G&A program has quickly and significantly increased the scale and speed at which the county can complete restoration projects. Bolstering this program will bring significant amounts of economic opportunity while protecting forest resources, habitat, and recreational opportunities. The additional flexibility provided by this bill is a common sense fix to a program that's proven to be highly successful. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. And finally, I want to thank Congressman Fulcher for his leadership on this bill. He's been a great partner, and I look forward to working with him and this committee to get this critical legislation over the finish line. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Now recognize the Chairman of the Subcommittee on Forestry, Congressman LaMalfa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the time, appreciate this bill coming forward, and my good colleague from Washington stated very well the direction this bill is going. Indeed, this was initially limited to state forest agencies, this Good Neighbor Authority. It was made permanent in 2014 Farm Bill, expanded in the 2018 Farm Bill by making counties and tribes eligible. What we see here is that we also need to allow them to share in the revenue that they put forward with their good work. So this bill will make that expansion, make that right for our counties and our tribes to be able to indeed be compensated and be good partners on this, because the pace and scale of the work we need to be doing in the forest, we need to have all hands on deck, all possible partners, and they should be able to be paid for their work to do so. As we know, we've had massive wildfire in the west, my own district suffering a lot, but all my neighboring ones as well. We have at least 50 million acres of forest land at high risk currently, and so immediate thinning, restoration is necessary. So having these revenues available to tribes and counties, also one of the good measures is that it'll help to reinvest in adjacent non-federal land areas that are part of the existing Good Neighbor Agreement. It's really indeed a common sense fix that these lands are within our agreement, and our forest health needs are not limited to just federal lands. So I'm very pleased and happy for my colleague, Mr. Fulcher, and all those that came on board to help move this legislation, Mr. Chairman. I support it. Let's all vote aye on H.R. 1450. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from South Dakota, Congressman Johnson.
Mr. Chairman, we know that managed forests are healthy forests, and we also know that the Constitution, court cases, and numerous treaties really tell us that we need to have a government-to-government relationship with Native American tribes. And so I'm always a little concerned when we give states robust authority or opportunities that we don't provide to tribes. This bill is a great opportunity to try to make sure that we're working with tribes as well as with counties to provide the right incentive structures for them to help manage these forests, reduce wildfire. It's a great bill. I'm going to be voting yes.
Thank the gentleman. Please recognize the gentleman from New Mexico for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to echo what the gentleman just said. In particular, I want to highlight the Mescalero Apache tribe in the Lincoln National Forest. They have been asking for this type of authority because they have suffered from the wildfire impacts on national forest lands that have come onto tribal forests and have been unable to collaborate with the U.S. Forest Service to do dual restoration on both forest and tribal lands, and that as a result, their economic output has suffered at places like Ski Apache. So this is incredibly important. I know that the Mescalero Apache fully supports this legislation, so I bring a message of support from them. And again, this is a great way to honor that government-to-government relationship and assist sovereign nations in managing and protecting their own tribal lands. I urge all my colleagues to support it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member.
Thank the gentleman from New Mexico. Any others to seek to speak on the bill?
Mr. Chairman, just quickly.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Yes, I participated in a intertribal meeting last Friday of sovereign nations, and this issue came out loud and clear, the importance of a good neighbor policy to respect Native American tribal lands in the maintaining and the management of our forests. And the reality is that Native Americans have been managing our forests long before, for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I might say in instances that I can point to, in some at least that I'm familiar with, in a better way than we have managed the forests. So this good neighbor policy, I think, is a good example of how we can work together and reflect the wisdom and the understanding of the management of these forests that historically go back to these sovereign nations in ways that we truly don't understand the history and the complexity and the heartfelt attachment and the meaning of this. So it's a good bill, and I'm glad to see all this bipartisan support.
I'm going to take the liberty to recognize myself to speak on this bill, and really to echo what all of my colleagues have said. The Good Neighbor Authority has been an important tool for the Forest Service to increase active forest management by entering into partnership agreements with states, counties, and tribes. And while the 2018 Farm Bill expanded eligibility beyond states to counties and tribes, the law did not authorize those entities to retain timber revenues derived from Good Neighbor Authority agreements as the law authorized for state partners. So to extend that same authority to counties and tribes, this legislation allows those entities to retain such timber revenues. The bill also authorizes states, counties, and tribes to reinvest such funding into restoration projects on non-federal lands that are located within an authorized Good Neighbor Authority agreement. So making this change will further incentivize counties and tribes to enter into more Good Neighbor agreements, authority agreements, and this is going to encourage more public-private partnerships and more landscape-scale forest management projects. So I certainly urge my colleagues to support treating tribes and counties as good neighbors. Anyone else seek recognition to speak on the bill itself? Seeing none, does any member have any amendments to the bill? All right, seeing none, I now recognize the ranking member for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the bill, H.R. 1450, be reported favorably to the House with the recommendation that it do pass.
Does anybody seek recognition to speak on that motion? No. Then the question was the motion offered by the gentleman from Georgia to favorably report H.R. 1450.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to seek a recorded vote.
Very good. A recorded vote has been requested, and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Chairman votes aye. Mr. Lucas. Aye. Mr. Lucas votes aye. Mr. Austin Scott. Aye. Mr. Austin Scott votes aye. Mr. Crawford. Aye. Mr. Crawford votes aye. Mr. Desjardins. Aye. Mr. Desjardins votes aye. Mr. LaMalfa. Aye. Mr. LaMalfa votes aye. Mr. Rouser. Aye. Mr. Rouser votes aye. Mr. Kelly.
Aye.
Mr. Kelly votes aye. Mr. Bacon.
Aye.
Mr. Bacon votes aye. Mr. Bost.
Aye.
Mr. Bost votes aye. Mr. Johnson. Aye. Mr. Johnson votes aye. Mr. Baird.
Aye.
Mr. Baird votes aye. Mr. Mann.
Aye.
Mr. Mann votes aye. Mr. Feenstra.
Aye.
Mr. Feenstra votes aye. Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller votes aye. Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore votes aye. Mrs. Kamick. Mrs. Kamick votes aye. Mr. Finstad. Mr. Finstad votes aye. Mr. Rose.
Yes.
Mr. Rose votes aye. Mr. Jackson of Texas.
Aye.
Mr. Jackson of Texas votes aye. Mr. Molinaro.
Aye.
Mr. Molinaro votes aye. Ms. De La Cruz. Aye. Ms. De La Cruz votes aye. Mr. Langworthy. Aye. Mr. Langworthy votes aye. Mr. Duarte. Mr. Duarte. Mr. Nunn.
Aye.
Mr. Nunn votes aye. Mr. Alford.
Aye.
Mr. Alford votes aye. Mr. Van Orden.
Aye.
Mr. Van Orden votes aye. Ms. Chavez DeReamer.
Aye.
Ms. Chavez DeReamer votes aye. Mr. Miller of Ohio. Mr. Miller. Mr. David Scott.
Aye.
Mr. David Scott votes aye. Mr. Costa.
Aye.
Mr. Costa votes aye. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern votes aye. Ms. Adams.
Adams votes aye.
Ms. Adams votes aye. Ms. Spanberger.
Aye.
Ms. Spanberger votes aye. Mrs. Hayes.
Aye.
Mrs. Hayes votes aye. Ms. Brown.
Aye.
Ms. Brown votes aye. Ms. Davids of Kansas.
Aye.
Ms. Davids votes aye. Ms. Slotkin.
Aye.
Ms. Slotkin votes aye. Ms. Caraballo.
Aye.
Ms. Caraballo votes aye. Ms. Salinas.
Aye.
Ms. Salinas votes aye. Ms. Glusenkamp Perez.
Aye.
Ms. Glusenkamp Perez votes aye. Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Davis votes aye. Ms. Takuda.
Aye.
Ms. Takuda votes aye. Ms. Budzinski.
Aye.
Ms. Budzinski votes aye. Mr. Sorensen.
Aye.
Mr. Sorensen votes aye. Mr. Vasquez.
Aye.
Mr. Vasquez votes aye. Ms. Crockett.
Aye.
Ms. Crockett votes aye. Mr. Jackson.
Aye.
Mr. Jackson votes aye. Mr. Kazar.
Aye.
Mr. Kazar votes aye. Ms. Pingree. Ms. Pingree votes aye. Mr. Carbajal. Mr. Carbajal. Ms. Craig. Ms. Craig votes aye. Mr. Soto.
Aye.
Mr. Soto votes aye. Mr. Bishop.
Aye.
Mr. Bishop votes aye. Mr. Duarte. Mr. Miller of Ohio. Mr. Carbajal.
Have all members voted, and does any member wish to change their vote? If not, the clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, the ayes are 51, the nays are 0.
The ayes have it, and the bill, H.R. 1450, is ordered reported favorably to the House. Does any member give notice of intent to file supplemental, minority, additional, or dissenting views to H.R. 1450? If so, please have them submitted to the council's office, room 1407, 5 p.m. on Monday, May 15th. And we'll move on to H.R. 1713, Department of Energy and U.S. Department of Agriculture Interagency Research Act. The bill, H.R. 1713, the DOE and USDA Interagency Research Act, is now before the committee for consideration without objection. A first reading of the bill will be waived and it will be open for amendment at any point. Without objection, the Subcommittee on Conservation Research and Biotechnology is discharged from further consideration of H.R. 1713. I now recognize myself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1713, which is at the desk. This amendment incorporates the amendments that were adopted when the Science Committee, which has primary jurisdiction, marked up this bill. Without objection, the reading of the amendment is waived and the substitute will be considered as original text for the purposes of further amendment. And I will open this up for members to have remarks on the bill. And I now recognize the author of the bill and our colleague, the gentleman from Oklahoma, for 5 minutes to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From my position as chairman of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee and as a member of the House Agriculture Committee, I can clearly see how important and pressing the need is for increased interagency research partnerships. We are facing global competition in all areas of research, but especially in the topics of agriculture and energy. That is why I authored this important piece of legislation to ensure that the federal agencies will be able to continue to collaborate on strategic research that will enhance U.S. competitiveness and economic prosperity for the next generation. My bill, H.R. 1713, the DOE and USDA Interagency Research Act, directs DOE and USDA to carry out cross-cutting research and develop activities focused on the joint advancements of DOE and USDA mission priorities. It directs the Secretary to conduct collaborative research over a range of focus areas and applications, to develop methods to accommodate large data sets on agriculture, environmental, and supply chain information, and to supply research infrastructure and workforce development for both industries. DOE and USDA have a long history of working together to solve tough research problems and find solutions for American taxpayers. By authorizing this partnership, we ensure that USDA can leverage DOE's tremendous expertise and resources for years to come. In doing this, we maximize our return on investment of limited federal research dollars and improve our ability to address research needs in key areas like crop science, carbon storage, precision agriculture, and biofuels, among many other areas. I ask for your support on this common sense, good governance bill, and I thank the chairman for his attention to this important issue, and I yield back the rest of my time, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Any other members wish to speak on this particular piece of legislation? If not, I'll yield. I'll take 5 minutes to be able to, less than 5 minutes, I promise, to speak on the bill. American agriculture, I've always believed and can be defined simply by 3 words: science, technology, and innovation. And this wouldn't be possible without agricultural research conducted by scientists at USDA and our land-grant universities. That being said, public investment in agricultural research has steadily declined since 2002 when adjusted for inflation, and we're now being outspent by China and other competitors. Now, let me be clear, we're still ahead of them in research, but they are closing the gap. Absent increased funding for agricultural research, this bill will ensure that both USDA and the Department of Energy are working together to fund research that is mutually beneficial to both agencies. I thank Chairman Lucas for his leadership on this issue, to increase interagency collaboration and ensure that American agriculture can continue to provide the safest, most abundant, and most affordable food and fiber supply in the world. And with that, I would urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this bill. So, hearing no further discussion, the committee will now consider the whole amendment in nature of a substitute. Does any member have any amendment to the bill? Seeing none, I now recognize the ranking member for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the bill, H.R. 1713, as amended, be reported favorably to the House with the recommendation that it do pass.
I thank the gentleman. Does any member wish to discuss the motion? The question is on the motion offered by the gentleman from Georgia to favorably report H.R. 1713. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Sir, I would like to request a recorded vote.
So a recorded vote is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Chairman votes aye. Mr. Lucas? Aye. Mr. Lucas votes aye. Mr. Austin Scott? Aye. Mr. Austin Scott votes aye. Mr. Crawford? Aye. Mr. Crawford votes aye. Mr. Desjardins? Aye. Mr. Desjardins votes aye. Mr. LaMalfa? Aye. Mr. LaMalfa votes aye. Mr. Rouser?
Aye.
Mr. Rouser votes aye. Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly votes aye. Mr. Bacon?
Aye.
Mr. Bacon votes aye. Mr. Bost?
Aye.
Mr. Bost votes aye. Mr. Johnson? Aye. Mr. Johnson votes aye. Mr. Baird?
Aye.
Mr. Baird votes aye. Mr. Mann? Aye. Mr. Mann votes aye. Mr. Feenstra? Mr. Feenstra votes aye. Mrs. Miller?
No.
Mrs. Miller votes no. Mr. Moore? Mr. Moore votes aye. Mrs. Kamick? Aye. Mrs. Kamick votes aye. Mr. Finstad? Aye. Mr. Finstad votes aye. Mr. Rose?
Yes.
Mr. Rose votes aye. Mr. Jackson of Texas?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson of Texas votes aye. Mr. Molinaro? Aye. Mr. Molinaro votes aye. Ms. De La Cruz? Aye. Ms. De La Cruz votes aye. Mr. Langworthy? Aye. Mr. Langworthy votes aye. Mr. Duarte? Aye. Mr. Duarte votes aye. Mr. Nunn?
Aye.
Mr. Nunn votes aye. Mr. Alford?
Aye.
Mr. Alford votes aye. Mr. Van Orden?
Aye.
Mr. Van Orden votes aye. Ms. Chavez de Reamer?
Aye.
Ms. Chavez de Reamer votes aye. Mr. Miller? Aye. Mr. Miller votes aye. Mr. David Scott?
Aye.
Mr. David Scott votes aye. Mr. Costa?
Aye.
Mr. Costa votes aye. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern votes aye. Ms. Adams?
Adams votes aye.
Ms. Adams votes aye. Ms. Spanberger?
Aye.
Ms. Spanberger votes aye. Mrs. Hayes?
Hayes votes aye.
Mrs. Hayes votes aye. Ms. Brown? Brown votes aye. Ms. Brown votes aye. Ms. Davids of Kansas?
Aye.
Ms. Davids votes aye. Ms. Slotkin?
Aye.
Ms. Slotkin votes aye. Ms. Caravello?
Aye.
Ms. Caravello votes aye. Ms. Salinas?
Aye.
Ms. Salinas votes aye. Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez? Aye. Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez votes aye. Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Davis votes aye. Ms. Takuda?
Aye.
Ms. Takuda votes aye. Ms. Budzinski?
Aye.
Ms. Budzinski votes aye. Mr. Sorensen?
Aye.
Mr. Sorensen votes aye. Mr. Vasquez? Aye. Mr. Vasquez votes aye. Ms. Crockett?
Aye.
Ms. Crockett votes aye. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson votes aye. Mr. Kazar? Mr. Kazar votes aye. Ms. Pingree? Ms. Pingree votes aye. Mr. Carbajal?
Aye.
Mr. Carbajal votes aye. Ms. Craig? Aye. Ms. Craig votes aye. Mr. Soto?
Aye.
Mr. Soto votes aye. Mr. Bishop? Aye. Mr. Bishop votes aye.
Have all members voted? And does any member wish to change their vote? If not, the clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, the ayes are 53, the nays are 1.
The ayes have it, and the bill, H.R. 1713, is reported favorably to the House. Does any member give notice of intent to file supplemental, minority, additional, or dissenting views to H.R. 1713? If so, please have them submitted to the Council's office, room 1407, by 5 p.m. on Monday, May 15th. We'll now entertain H.R. 1480, the Beagle Brigade Act of 2023. Yeah, I'm sorry, that title just makes you smile. Yeah. All right, back to business. The bill H.R. 1480, the Beagle Brigade Act, is now before the committee for consideration, and without objection, the first reading of the bill will be waived, and it will be open for amendment at any point. Without objection, the Subcommittee on Livestock, Dairy, and Poultry is discharged from further consideration of H.R. 1480. I now recognize myself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1480, which is at the desk. The amendment removes the new authorization of appropriation and also adds an expiration date in order to comply with the House floor protocols. Without objection, the reading of the amendment is waived, and a substitute will be considered as original text for the purpose of further amendment. Do any members have remarks on the bill? Mr. Bishop from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I am proud to rise in support of H.R. 1480, the Beagle Brigade Act. This legislation provides authorization for the Department of Agriculture's National Detector Dog Training Center, which has been instrumental in protecting American agriculture by keeping foreign animal and plant pests and diseases out of the country. The U.S. agriculture sector is a $1 trillion industry constantly under threat of foreign pests and diseases, such as the African swine fever, foot and mouth disease, or citrus greening disease, that could be introduced through our nation's ports of entry, including airports, harbors, mail, and cargo facilities. Some of these diseases could cost the American economy tens of billions of dollars to contain and eradicate if they're detected in the country. Agriculture detector dogs, also known as the Beagle Brigade, are an important tool in preventing these threats and eradicating them in the event that they overcome our safeguards. Our Beagle Brigade is at work every day. You may have seen them at customs screening in the airport after returning from trips abroad, standing by to alert their handlers to contraband food, live animals, and other products that could harbor foreign pests that pose a threat to domestic crops or livestock. As an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, the brigade is well worth its value in keeping out these pests and diseases before they can become a problem. In addition to authorizing the National Detector Dog Training Center, this bill requires the facility to ensure the health and well-being of the dogs under its care and to provide opportunities for private adoption of retirement-age trained dogs and dogs that don't complete the training. Detector dogs work their best when they are handled humanely, and establishing this requirement in law would ensure that the facility continues to uphold this expectation. I'm pleased to note that the bill has the support of over 50 organizations representing veterinarians, agricultural producers, and animal health groups. And I'm grateful for my colleagues who have co-sponsored the resolution, including my good friend, Representative Drew Ferguson, whose district is home to the National Detector Dog Training Center in Noonan, Georgia. Chairman Thompson has offered an amendment in the nature of the substitute, which will add a sunset provision extending authority until September 30th, 2028, which I fully support. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Scott, for considering the Beagle Brigade bill today, which means so much to our farmers and ranchers as we protect American agriculture. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back and urge passage.
I thank the gentleman. Any other members wish to seek to speak on the bill? The gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and to the ranking member. As a dog lover, as so many of us are, I'm proud to co-sponsor this legislation, including the bill title. My good friend, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Bishop, has introduced great legislation here that will take the training center off the chopping block to continue to do great work. And I'm proud to endorse this legislation and ask for members to do the same. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Any other members seek recognition to speak on the bill? Okay, if not, I'll recognize myself. Briefly, the National Detector Dog Training Center really serves as an important line of defense in safeguarding America's agricultural and natural resources from harmful pests and diseases. This bill simply codifies the training center that's been in existence since 1984, and I'm glad to see that the center received the recognition and the prioritization it deserves. Happy to support Mr. Sanford's legislation and encourage all my colleagues to do the same. Hearing no further discussion, the committee will now consider the whole amendment in the form of a substitute. Does any member have any amendment to the bill? All right, seeing none, I now recognize the ranking member for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Bill 1480, as amended, be reported favorably to the House with the recommendation that it do pass.
Does any member wish to discuss the motion? Seeing none, the question is on the motion offered by the gentleman from Georgia to favorably report H.R. 1480 as amended. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill H.R. 1480 as amended is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Does any member wish to give notice of intent to file supplemental, minority, additional, or dissenting views to H.R. 1480? If so, have them submitted to the council office, room 1407, by 5 p.m. on Monday, May 15th. The final bill that we'll be considering is H.R. 1697, the Promoting Precision Agriculture Act of 2023. The bill, H.R. 1697, the Promoting Precision Agriculture Act of 2023, is now before the committee for consideration, and without objection, a first reading of the bill will be waived and it will be open for amendment at any point. Without objection, the Subcommittee on Commodity Markets, Digital Assets, and Rural Development is discharged from further consideration of H.R. 1697. Do any members have remarks on the bill? Recognize the chairman of the Livestock, Poultry, Dairy, and Beagle Subcommittee.
Fair enough.
There you go. I just had to get that in. It's
growing.
Mr. Chairman. It's growing. Mr. Mann for 5 minutes.
Chairman Thompson, thank you. I rise in support of H.R. 1697, the Promoting Precision Agriculture Act, legislation that I'm proud to have worked on with Representative Davis. As we all know, ag producers across America have and continue to adopt precision agriculture techniques to more efficiently feed, fuel, and clothe the world. These technological advances have helped producers improve crop yields, make informed management decisions, lower costs, which leads to increased profitability. However, new technology often brings new challenges, like the need to protect producers from cyber threats and for equipment manufacturers and producers alike to be at the table with new legislation created in this area. Congress should ensure that stakeholders have a seat at the table when new regulations are being worked out. That's the wise and fair thing to do. As Congress establishes new standards for precision agriculture, the Promoting Precision Agriculture Act would establish a partnership between the federal government and the private sector to create a voluntary, and that's key, voluntary interconnectivity standards and prioritize the cybersecurity needs for this technology. The Promoting Precision Agriculture Act does what the House Ag Committee does so well. It brings together ag producers, stakeholders, and lawmakers to discuss regulations regarding policy and new technologies. I encourage all of my colleagues to vote yes and support the bill, and with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Others recognized. Mr. Davis, North Carolina.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and to the ranking member for bringing us forward today. The agriculture community is the backbone of Eastern North Carolina, rural America, and our nation at large. Back home, I constantly hear about the barriers to farmer success, which is why I proudly introduced H.R. 1697 with my colleague, Representative Mann. Precision agriculture includes the use of devices like robotics, sensors, monitors, drones, and more to help our growers increase efficiency, boost crop yields, and lower costs. The Promoting Precision Agriculture Act will ensure our growers have the access to cutting-edge precision agriculture technologies that's much needed. This legislation will help support our farmers as we utilize next-generation agriculture to improve our economic outlook. So, Mr. Chair, thank you again, and Representative Mann, and to everyone that's here today. We have an opportunity through this to deliver for our farmers, and I ask for your support with this legislation moving forward. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman from North Carolina. He yields back. Anyone else wish seek recognition to speak on this bill? Please, the gentlelady from Kansas.
My colleagues are teasing me that I just want to say Beagle. Mr. Chairman, thank you for recognizing me to speak in support of this piece of legislation. And I just want to thank Mr. Davis and my colleague from Kansas, Mr. Mann, for working to ensure that there's a partnership between the USDA and the private sector, our farmers and growers, as they implement some key technologies that are going to have a pretty significant impact on their ability to continue to not just feed Kansas and the world, but also put food on their own tables. With that, I'll yield back. Thank you.
Thank the gentlelady. Any other members seek to speak on this bill? If not, I'll recognize myself for just a few comments on H.R. 1697. Farmers, ranchers, and foresters are the best stewards of their land, and they strive to reduce the use of water, fuel, fertilizer, chemicals, and quite frankly, other inputs. Deployment of new technology, including precision agriculture, have resulted in American farmers becoming the most efficient producers of food and fiber anywhere in the world. And because of agricultural innovation, U.S. farm outputs have increased threefold since the 1940s, with little to no change in inputs. Precision agriculture can, among other things, reduce inputs, increase outputs, lower environmental impact, increase integration and efficiency in the supply chain, and provide important cost savings. The Promoting Precision Agriculture Act establishes a partnership between the federal government and the private sector to build standards and best practices for precision agriculture to enhance its adoption throughout the United States. This bill also looks to create guidelines on how to address cybersecurity threats facing precision agriculture, including for ag producers and the ag supply chain. So I'm happy to support this bill and encourage members to vote in favor. Seeing no other members speaking on the bill, does any member have an amendment to the bill? Seeing none, now recognize the ranking member for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the bill H.R. 1697 be reported favorably to the House with the recommendation that it do pass.
Does any member wish to discuss the motion? Seeing none, the question is on the motion offered by the gentleman from Georgia to favorably report H.R. 1697. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill H.R. 1697 is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Do any members give notice of intent to file supplemental, minority, additional, or dissenting views to H.R. 1697? If so, please have them submitted to the Council's Office Room 1407 by 5 p.m. on Monday, May 15th. Without objection, the usual instructions are given to staff that consist of making such technical, clarifying, or confirming changes as are appropriate without changing the substance of the legislation. And this meeting is now adjourned.
Congratulations.
I'll go on in, buddy. 5 bills, huh?
Good job.
Thank you.